What is going on, everyone? My name is Andy. Welcome back to another FPL video, and today we are rating your wildcard draft. So yesterday I put together a video with my draft for if I was wildcarding, but now I've asked for yours. So I've got 4 drafts to go through. Going to give my opinion, things to think about, players you could maybe swap in instead. Not saying you have to do these, like you don't have to make the same moves that I would make, but it's just to give you something to think about. So if you like these type of videos, please do give it a like, subscribe if you're new around here, and let's jump into it. So first up, a draft from Cheeky T says, a lack of City players is a bit of a worry. James rotating with Azpilicueta, a bit of a worry. Justin and Mitchell are short-term picks, and Podence could also have a lack of minutes. So when I put out these requests, I usually ask for a nicely cropped image as well as some concerns and stuff around the team or some thoughts about the team. So there's quite a few of this one. Obviously, I won't keep going through the same points for everyone's teams. Again, I've said this a million times this week. If you're wildcarding this early, there are going to be some kind of concerns over minutes and stuff. We don't really have enough data to go on. But I think Reece James is good enough an option where the upside is much bigger than the risk of putting him in. So yes, Azpilicueta could come in at some point, but the fact he started the first 2 will give me quite a lot of promise that he's going to continue starting. Now, at some point, he might get rotated for Azpilicueta, but I don't think you need to really worry about that too much. I know for sure if I was wildcarding, he would be in any draft that I made, so I wouldn't worry about him. Justin and Mitchell, yes, they are short-term picks. Just Mitchell, actually, I don't think is that bad of an issue because right now you can use him, and then if you've got enough other playing players, so Justin, Trent, James, and Sice is probably okay. If you really wanted to make sure, then you could swap Justin for anyone that's got Justin in your drafts for a different 4.5 that's definitely going to play kind of week in, week out, most weeks for the whole season. Obviously, Justin's relying on Ricardo staying out. He could stay a left wing back or left back, and Ricardo could come in at right back, and Castagna could be benched. It seems unlikely that would happen, but we don't know for sure. So there is a chance Justin could keep his place, although I would doubt it. So you could go for like a Charlie Taylor, Burnley, for example, Lamptey at Brighton, something like that, if you wanted to be sure. Because you're right, when Van Aanholt's back, it's very unlikely that Mitchell's going to keep his place. And Reece James, if you're worried about him too, you probably want to get a 4.5 that you're sure about. But for the next 2 weeks after Man City game, Justin looks like a really good pick. So it is a bit of a tricky position to be in. Overall, though, this is probably one of the strongest drafts, I think, that was sent to me. The one key missing player here is Werner. Now, I don't know how much money is in the bank, but potentially you could swap Brewster and Son to Werner and a 4.5 midfielder. You would need to find 0.5 million to do that, so I don't know if this particular draft's got 0.5 million, but that is an option as well. But instead, you've got Son in there, and I think going forward, yeah, maybe 3.52 will be the best option with cheaper players up front. Calvert-Lewin's now gone up to 7.3 million. If you haven't got him in, his price is going up quite highly. But I do think with Werner, I've said this before, if he blanks this week, he'll get sold heavily, I think. A lot of people are relying on this West Brom game. If he does well, then I think it's Crystal Palace and Southampton after that at home as well. So that's decent fixtures. But at the end of the day, with all these drafts, you have to make sacrifices somewhere. So this one isn't a 3-4-3 with Werner. It's a 3-5-2 with Son. I don't think that's really a bad thing to do. So overall, I really like the structure of this squad. I think Podence is worth the risk, a bit like or not Dan James, a bit like Reece James. You've still got your Liverpool midfielder in there. I think this is really strong. The benches may be a worry at some point because basically all 4 of your bench players might not play in the next few weeks. You know, we don't know if Bruce is definitely going to go. We don't know if Justin's going to keep his place once Ricardo's back. And we don't know if Mitchell's going to keep his place when Van Aanholt's back. That one's probably the least likely to happen. So my only worry would be maybe the bench. But overall, first 11, extremely strong, I think. Just to say something to the start, this Twitter handle was not actually at Ben. But I wasn't too sure about putting in the handle that was used. So I just put in the name that was on the account, which was Ben. So this is the 3-4-3. And he said putting money in midfield is the aim. I mean, putting quite a bit of money in midfield. But obviously, Zaha's still only around 7 million. So he's not the most expensive player, and obviously you've got Danny Ings there. A lot of people have asked me if I'm overlooking Danny Ings. Obviously he did really well against Spurs, and if he's on penalties, he's going to continue to do really well throughout the whole season. If I was picking an 8.5 million midfielder right now, I'd probably slightly just prefer Jimenez because the fixtures are really good for the next 5, but Ings does have Burnley away and West Brom at home. So next 2 fixtures are actually pretty decent for Ings anyway. So nice pick. And I do think, I don't know, right now it's hard to know how the rest of the FPL season is going to go, let alone the next couple of weeks. But I do think there's a couple of things that could happen. One, people might start looking away from Liverpool defenders at some point. I'm not saying now is the time to do it. And also I think there is kind of an argument to go really kind of cheap up front and put more money into midfield. If the likes of De Bruyne and Sterling and Salah are still really good options, and Son is in the mix as well, and we're not really sure about Werner, Jesus might lose his place once Aguero's back, Martial, will he do anything? We'll have to wait and see. If not, you could go to kind of 8.5 and below. I actually think some people in the next few weeks for a draft might even make like Calvert-Lewin as the most expensive striker, either in a 2 or a 3, going for likes of Mitrovic, Adams, Chris Wood, Antonio, whoever it might be, and really putting money in midfield. So I quite like this draft. I think Mitrovic is a good fixture this week. And going forward, like, he's talisman of that team. He's on penalties. That's how he's already got one of his goals. So decent pick. Zaha is like not a favourite of mine, but that's just personal preference. You shouldn't necessarily take that into account. The only thing I would say is a bit like the last team. The bench is a little bit dodgy. You're going to have to play Mitchell or Justin most weeks, which is probably fine for the next couple of weeks. But after that, you might have to make some changes. Obviously, you can make transfers. But 4.5 million, 4 million defender transfers probably aren't the most ideal. And Dunn for Burnley is only going to be in the team as long as me and Tarkowski are out. And I'm not sure yet how long that is going to be at the time of recording this. So have to wait on news on that, basically. If he's going to be in the team for a few weeks, you might be okay. But at some point, you're probably going to be stuck with two 4 million pound defenders that just aren't going to play. I really like Sice. Martinez is obviously the wildcard pick for goalkeepers. I still think Meslier at Leeds, if you think Leeds' defence is going to do okay, could be a good option as well. But overall, again, a nice structure. Not really... obviously, it's template because there are only a certain amount of players we're using, but no Pedence in here. He could be in there instead of Zaha. Maybe that would let you upgrade somewhere else if there's upgrades you want to do. I'm not saying you should do that, but there's an option to do that. The good thing I like about Zaha, for anyone that's thinking about him, is if it does all go wrong, which we've seen before, there's plenty of players around that 7 million mark that you could go for now. Like, especially like Harvey Barnes could be a really good option. So I like the structure of the team, but I would really have a think about that bench. Okay, so I've chosen this draft because it's quite a bit different to all the other ones that I was sent. 4-4-2, but not only that, quite a few different players in there that I've not seen in many drafts. So let's start at the back. 4 at the back I quite like, right? 4-4-2. The one thing with this is you've got Davis on the bench, right? Who we know is not going to play. He might come on for the odd minute here or there, but he's not going to be a first choice starter for Aston Villa. And this is one of the problems with wildcarding so early, with the transfer window hasn't shut. I would be a little bit tempted to go for Brewster and hope that he moves clubs. The only thing if he doesn't, which I've said plenty of times before, you're stuck with a Liverpool player and that blocks you from getting 3 Liverpool, which you may want at some point. So something to consider maybe. But in terms of the back 4, Trent Alexander-Arnold, decent pick. Luca Digne is someone I've got in my main team. I don't know if I would have him... I don't know, it's one of those weird situations where I do think he's a good pick, but if I was wildcarding, I'd probably get rid of him because he's 6 million, I'm not 100% sure. But if I think he's a good pick because he's in my team, he's probably a good wildcard pick as well. And you can always transfer him down at some point if you need to, or across to somebody else. So I do like that pick. Bellerin is the one that sticks out to me as I'm not 100% sure about. Mostly because if we could get the Bellerin of old, then I'd want him. He'd almost be essential, right? Arsenal would be getting clean sheets. He's good going forward as well. We're just not seeing that for a little while from either end. Arsenal clean sheets or Bellerin going forward. Maybe that will change. A lot of people think that Arteta's heavily improved Arsenal. So if Bellerin's going to play week in, week out for 5 million, he's a good option. If you had 0.1 more, you've got the template picks of Reece James and Sice at Wolves instead, if you wanted to do that. But I like the fact you've gone a little bit different there. And then Castagna is all about, will he keep his place? As I've already said, I think he probably will. But Ndidi out now as well. So it's an interesting one because Leicester have conceded obviously a couple to Burnley. Ndidi played centre-back. Evans is back now, so you would have expected Ndidi to go to midfield. So they've obviously been playing without him there already. I don't think they're going to necessarily get turned over by size. They might do by Man City, but who doesn't get turned over by Man City? And going forward after that, they've got a couple of good fixtures. So I actually quite like him. I think he's quite attacking. Obviously, you shouldn't expect to return every single game, which I think is what he's had so far, goal and assist. But yeah, I like it as a decent pick. And again, 5.5 million, you could go somewhere else. You have said you've got 0.5 in the bank. You're considering downgrading Castagna or Luca Dean and upgrading Ings to Werner. So that's something you could do. I do think Ings for the next 2 fixtures is decent, but obviously Werner's very heavily owned and we are expecting big things in that West Brom game. So you could do that, but it is an extra million to spend. If I was going to downgrade anyone, I'd maybe think of even putting either Castagna down to Reece James or... and Sice and hoping that Werner falls in price, which is looking unlikely, but it could happen. Or yeah, you could do Luca Dean down to 5.1 million or another 5 million defender. Overall, I quite like it. I think Anguissa is a little bit of a knee-jerk because he got the assist in the last game, but I think plenty of people said pre-season he could be the better option at Wolves. You've obviously got Burke if you want to take a risk that he keeps starting up front for Sheffield United. The only thing I would say I don't like about the team is Costa. I'm still not convinced by Leeds attacking players. He's 5.6 million. You could get Podence in the Wolves side with great fixtures for the same price. So I don't particularly like Costa. I'm not saying you should go without him, but I just think the amount of goals Leeds have scored can't be continued at the rate it's going to be. It has gone so far. So yeah, Leeds player is not for me. But overall, decent pick. I think Steer is probably ahead of Neeland, by the way, for Aston Villa. But when Heaton comes back, he'll probably be the number 2 anyway. Okay, so Luciano up last. Concerns on the bench. Nothing in the bank, but they really like the first 11. And yeah, the bench is a bit dodgy because Ferguson, you know, we don't even know when he's going to play yet. That's the thing. I did say pre-season that I might put him in, and then when he's back, he'll be straight back into the team. But we just don't know when that's going to happen. And even when he is back fit, how quickly we get back into the team. So he worries me. Davis I've already spoken about. Basuma is going to be like 2 points off the bench most weeks. So I think having to play Lamptey every single week, I'm not sure I wouldn't like that personally. It's not to say you shouldn't do it, but I would want a little bit more flexibility there than having to play Lamptey. Don't get me wrong, he looks great going forward, but I'm still not convinced enough by Brighton clean sheets to want to play him week in, week out. In terms of where you downgrade, obviously that's up to you. Like, you've got a first 11 that you're really happy with, so maybe you don't need to. But Bruno Fernandes down to like a Son or something like that, or even like I don't know, Havertz maybe. I know that's a bit knee-jerk because of the hat-trick, but somewhere around that price, you could go to Pulisic, you could go to Mahrez, whoever it might be, at that kind of 8.5 million to 9 million price if you go for Son. Fernandes down to that. I mean, he's 10.5 million. Even down to Son, that gives you 1.5 million to play around with. You could still keep most of this first 11 and just maybe upgrade the defence and the bench. That's probably where I would do it. I've picked this one because there's barely any drafts with Man United players in, and I wanted to give my opinion. I think it's wrong to think they're now bad options, but I do think the value is not necessarily there in Man United players. I said that pre-season. My opinion hasn't changed, but we haven't seen enough games to know whether that opinion is right or wrong yet. So I wouldn't want to get rid of Salah or De Bruyne. I think Jimenez looks good. You know I like Calvert-Lewin and Podence. I've talked about them all quite a lot already. Fernandes is the one that sticks out. Not because he's a bad option, but because, like you've already said, you really like your team, but you don't like the bench. And again, having to play Lamptey every week is maybe not ideal. I'd love to have, like, if you did Fernandes to Son, for example, it gives you 1.5 million. You can keep Lamptey and maybe you upgrade Ferguson to a 5.5 million defender. And then you can either play Lamptey or someone like that instead and still play 4-4-2. And obviously you've got Steer on the bench, which is decent for now until Heaton is fully back and probably takes that number 2 spot. So I like the draft. You're right, the first 11 looks great apart from maybe having to play Lamptey every week. Fernandes is the one that just sticks out at me as where you could get better value. But if you really want it, if you think he's going to do well, do not be put off by that. And maybe think of a different way you could upgrade your bench. So there is one last thing I wanted to mention on all these drafts, and for anyone that's wildcard, I don't know if I've already spoken about on other videos, and I certainly haven't in this one, is the bench. Now I've talked about it in some ways, saying you could upgrade the bench, here's ways to do it, but I really would strongly consider going with at least a couple of players you're happy with on the bench, because pre-season, it's all well and good to say, I'll get this 4 million, I'll get this 4 million. It doesn't matter if they play, I've got my first 11, I've got my wild card in hand, I can make transfers. But you're already wildcarding after just 2 weeks. If you then go for a similar bench, how are you going to get around it, right? Spending transfers on bench players is not really the ideal way to get a bunch of points. You want to have them in place on your wildcard for the most part. You can make changes down the line, but ideally that's not what you want to do. So going in with like a 4 million non-playing player, a 4 million that's probably not going to play soon, and then a defender you're not even sure about, or a midfielder or a forward you're not sure about, you are going to need your bench at some point, right? I'm not really one of these people that's worrying massively about games being postponed because of everything that's going on in the world right now. But at some point, some of your players might miss out. So it's good to have some playing players. I'm not saying you should spend millions and millions, like 5, 6, 7 million on your bench players, but you should really have at least a couple of playing bench players. Ideally, if you can get 2 playing goalkeepers, that would be great. I don't think I would do that personally if I was on wildcard, but that's another option. But I definitely would be quite hesitant to go with a non-playing bench, given you've already wildcarded after 2 weeks. You're going to be plenty of other headaches in the next couple of weeks with other players coming into form, players going out of form. You don't want to also be dealing with your bench players. So keep that in mind. I'm going to leave the video there. Give it a like if you've enjoyed it. Please do subscribe if you're new as well. Trying to hit that 125k mark. Who knows, by Christmas, it could happen if you hit that button if you haven't already and you're enjoying the content. Thanks to everyone that's signed up to Patreon so far. You can see everyone on the Patreon Legends wall. If you want to check it out, there is a link in the description below. There's extra content on there, Slack access, WhatsApp access, team reveals, all that kind of thing, depending on the tier that you sign up with. There'll be a Q&A over there on the middle tier later today. But yes, thanks very much for watching. Hit that like button, hit subscribe, and I'll catch you tomorrow for a deadline stream.